talking about the title of your new record, that it was curious, you know.
Okay. The title of the record comes from one of the short stories that are behind the 6 songs. So every song on this record is basically a ghost story or a story of the supernatural in some way. More in a kind of classical tradition, not like a modern horror thing, but more like a really old-fashioned supernatural ghost story. And The Raven That Refused to Sing is one of those stories. It's about an old man towards the end of his life, who had a sister when he was very young, that he was very close to, and she died when she was a child, and for the whole of the rest of his life he hasn't been able to form any emotional connection to any other human being. So he's now at the end of his life, he's very sad and very lonely, and a raven begins to visit his garden, and he feels somehow inside that this raven is the manifestation of his sister, his dead sister. When he was very young, whenever he was afraid or in fear of anything, his sister would sing to him to calm him down. So he feels that if he can make the raven sing to him, that somehow that will prove that she is the reincarnation of his sister. And so it's kind of a very romantic, but very tragic, very sad. There's a bit more to it than that, but I don't want to spoil the ending for you. But yes, and the actual story will be printed in the special edition.
Okay, and I've seen the artwork is pretty complex.
Yeah, it's all illustration this time. Usually I work with a photographer called Lasse Boyle, but this time I've worked with a German illustrator to try and get more of the feeling of like an old-fashioned book of ghost stories, the kind of book you'd find right at the back of a second-hand record store, wishful thinking, second-hand bookstore. Very kind of classical and almost like a book of fairy tales.
Okay, and is there something kind of autobiographical in what you write? Is kind of
only in the sense I think that a lot of the things that are inspiration for ghost stories, like a fear of death, a fear of mortality, a kind of feeling of regret for things you haven't done with your life, a feeling of loss, the loss of a loved one. I think those things are all of us, understand and share those feelings. And I think a lot of that is behind the emotional heart of the words. Yeah.
So you were talking about classic novels, and to me your record seemed like a more classic prog-oriented record compared to what you did in the last few years.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's kind of an old school progressive rock. Yeah, very much.
What's the role of Alan Parsons in all of that, or is it just supervising it all?
Well, I wanted the music definitely has a more old school. It almost looks back to the golden era of early 70s, particularly the period in time when progressive music and jazz music were very intertwined, and the jazz musicians were influencing the rock musicians, and the rock musicians were influencing the jazz musicians. That for me is a kind of golden era. So I wanted to make the sound of the album also in a way reference back to that period in the 70s when everything was analog recording. Things sounded very organic and very golden. And Alan was really top of my list because this is the guy that we shouldn't forget that engineered what for many people is the best sounding record ever. So whether you like the music or not, you listen to that record and you understand it's a beautifully recorded album. And this is the guy that recorded it, so he was top of my list, and luckily he knew who I was and admired what I was doing, so we were able to have him come and engineer the record.
So you were talking about jazz music that influences rock music and vice versa. That's why you picked Guthrie Govan to play guitar in your record, because I think it sums up this thing.
I think Guthrie's one of those guys that spans both rock and jazz. The rest of the band are a mixture of almost pure jazz musicians like Theo Travis, the saxophone flute player, and Adam Holtzman, the keyboard player, are jazz. They come from jazz. I mean, Adam played with Miles, Davis, so he's someone who very much comes from that background. And then you have people like myself and Marco, who are rock musicians, and then you have Nick Beggs, the bass player, is more like a pop guy, comes from a pop background. And then you have Guthrie, who kind of maybe somewhere between the two. And I think that I like the idea that there is this mixture of the jazz and the rock sensibility, because that's what I miss from a lot of modern music, and that I hear it a lot in the 70s music, is this kind of fusion of the two styles. So I was very much trying to get back, without wish. I mean, we're talking about this as if I've made this really kind of old-fashioned retro record. I hope it doesn't sound like a record that could have been made in 90s. I think it still sounds like a record from 2012 or 2013, but definitely the reference points are back to that era.
And how does it work between you and Guthrie, guitar-wise?
He does everything. No, listen, I mean, when you have Guthrie in the band, there's no need for me to do much, really. But I play the acoustic guitars on the record, and I play some of the simple electric parts. What was interesting is because we recorded the album very much live in the studio, we were all playing all the time. So I would give Guthrie all the hard stuff, and I would just play the simple stuff. Yeah? And of course the solos are Guthrie.
But I know you've recorded some demo tracks before going in the studio.
Yes.
The demo tracks became the song that I hear on the record, and any musician just played the part you wrote, or any of them could add something, or...
Well, both really. I mean, there are some parts of the tracks which were very structured, and I was very specific. Play these notes, don't play any other notes. But then also there are lots of solos on the record, and the solo. We have three amazing soloists in the band. We have Guthrie, we have Theo, and we have Adam. And whenever these guys stepped up to take a solo, it's their voice, and there are some very long solos. I mean, Guthrie plays on the end of Drive Home, he plays a 3-minute unbroken solo, and it's beautiful. And I'm not telling him any of the notes to play, So there's definitely a balance between the music, the structure that I give them, and them expressing themselves and enhancing the music.
And what's the main difference between writing music for your solo project or for Porcupine Tree or the other projects you were involved?
I think that the big difference on this record is that I knew that these guys, these musicians, were capable of doing things that I could never have conceived of myself or any of the other bands I've played doing. And what's interesting about that is it made me conceive and write music. I think I was reaching for a higher level of complexity. Not that the music is, technical or anything like that. It's I think still quite easy to enjoy, but there's definitely a higher level of musicality and complexity in the music, because I knew that these guys could do it. I couldn't play. So it's interesting to write music that I myself couldn't play. Almost like an old-fashioned composer, But I knew that these guys could.
Okay. And guitar-wise, are you using PRS, right? You're still using?
Yeah, I use PRS. I also play a guitar made by a New York company called Alumasonic, which is a guitar completely made of beautiful guitar. And also I played a guitar. Oh, actually, Guthrie played one of my guitars, which is a guitar made by La Rose. We had a bunch of guitars in the studio, but PRS is definitely my guitar.
And what about the amp?
I was playing through an AC30, Vox AC30, and Guthrie was using his Sur.
And listening to the record, I think that you use a lot of stomp boxes.
Yeah.
Have you got a favorite one? Have you got a favorite setup you always use?
I really like. Actually, I used for the first time on this record. I myself used a bunch of pedals that TC gave me. The tone print pedals. And I really love the vibrato pedal. I'm a great fan of. I don't really like chorus pedals. I don't really like flanges. I don't like phases so much. But I love subtle kind of vibrato and tremolo effects. Just give a little bit more colour to the sound. And the TC one is fabulous. The TC vibrato pedal is great.
And talking about the effects and how your guitar sounds, there's some chord progression or some chord voicing that when I hear, I immediately say, okay, it's Steven Wilson.
Oh, really? Okay.
I read in an interview that you started playing guitar just to write your own music. You're not into the iconic guitar hero world. So how does your approach to the instrument evolve?
I don't know. I mean, you know, I think you kind of answered the question you kind of answered the question the way you said it, because the music, the way I play guitar, has always been a direct consequence of what I wanted to write. So, I mean, a lot of the chords you're talking about, I don't even know the names of the chords. I mean, I found them sometime in my life. I found these chords, and I like the sound of them. And if I had to explain it to anyone else, I mean, Guthrie said, "What are the chords?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but this is what I do." And I show him, and he's like, "Oh, that's like a B minor diminished sustained fourth with a." Okay, whatever, you know. And so I play the guitar like an idiot, really, you know. But I know something is good when I hear it, and so I think my style has evolved really as my writing has evolved. For example, when I was working a lot more with metal sounds, of course that it tends to influence the way you play guitar. You play more riffs. You have guitars with down-tuned to D or C or B. Now I'm not writing using metal, I'm using more almost jazz tones. So that's again changing the chords. I'm playing a lot of, and I do know the name of this chord, I'm playing a lot of major sevens. I love the sound of major seven, you know. So there's a lot more major seven chords in the music.
Okay, and the PRS, the Paul Smith choice, has a role in all of this because, you know, there's this sentence that a lot of guitar player used to say that Paul Smith guitar lacks of personality.
Okay.
You know, I own a PRS, so
right. So you don't agree with that. Okay.
But talking about your few influences, your few sounds, do you think that this guitar has a particular role, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't know. I think Paul Reed. I kind of understand why people say that, because the Paul Reed Smith guitars, they're kind of good at everything. But maybe for some people, they want a guitar that's amazing at one thing. You know, like a Strat or a Telecaster is amazing at one. But I couldn't do a whole album on a Telecaster or a Strat. I couldn't even write a whole song on it because it's a very specific sound. The Paul Reed Smiths, they're kind of good at everything. They can almost be like a Tele or a Strat, but they can also be like a Les Paul, and I like that because I guess I'm not really a guitar hero. I don't want to be a guitar. What I want is a great tool for writing and developing creative material, and the Paul Reed Smith for me is fantastic for that.
And I know you compose your music even on the piano or something else.
Yeah.
Do you find any difference when you're holding guitar or?
Yeah, definitely. Well, you know, I think I have my favourite chords on a piano and I have my favourite chords on a guitar, and definitely I think you can probably tell from the album which songs were written on the keyboard and which songs were written on the guitar. I don't know if I could put that into words what that difference is, but I think you can tell which is which.
And I think that some kind of music is, I don't know if it's right, but timestamp. You know, if I say hair metal, you immediately think about the 80s.
Right.
If I say rock and roll, you think about the 50s. I think that progressive rock is kind of evolving through the years.
Yes.
So, have you got an explanation about this kind of mutation or evolution?
I think the thing about progressive rock, ultimately, if you kind of try to boil down what is progressive rock, it's music which is, well, two things. Firstly, it's music which is about the album and not the single. What I mean by that is that if you're a progressive rock musician, if you're working in that tradition, you don't think about 3-minute pop songs. You think about the album as a kind of musical journey. And I think people like that idea now more and more these days, because as we get more and more obsessed with technology and iPhones, there's almost something very appealing about the idea of something which requires a lot more attention and a lot more engagement and intellect. As the rest of the world dumbs down, you know, progressive rock seems like this oasis of intelligence, you know. I think the other thing about progressive music that appeals to young kids is that it is a way to have some, to make use of skill, musical skill. It's not music that you necessarily need to be incredibly technical to play. In fact, I find music that's too technical. I find dream theatre for me is too technical, a bit clinical. But I think that there is a way in progressive rock, as Guthrie proves. Guthrie is an extraordinary musician, but there isn't a lot of styles of music that would enable him to show what he can do while still being musical. Do you see what I mean? You can go and shred, but that's not music. But progressive rock is a great way for great musicians to express themselves, but still be part of something which has a kind of emotional quality. And I think that's quite appealing to a new generation of musicians.